When I think about Hat Creek, I think about history, our legacy project. I mean, it's our founding project. 1970, 71, when CalTrout was formed, Hat Creek was our first founding project. And it showed that an organization, a group of passionate anglers could come together and restore a stream and bring back a fishery. I think Hat Creek was one of the first creeks, you could argue, in the country that really embraced the wild trout management idea, that we didn't have to throw hatchery fish in, that you could have a catch and release ethic, you could have a controlled set of regulations focused on wild trout. I think people who really know their history and the wild trout movement will know that a lot of that ethic was born on Hat Creek.
So I showed up at Hat Creek in 1975. I had just moved to California and I went to see Andy Puyans in his fly shop in Walnut Creek. I said, "What's the best place to fish for trout in California?" He said, "Hat Creek." So I went to Hat Creek, and I came from the Rockies, so I got here in this water just around the bend upstream in the middle of the day on a July afternoon, and it was like, I'd never seen anything like this. There were no rocks, there were no eddies, there were no riffles, and there were I didn't know what to do. But I came back that evening with my kids and my wife, and there were fish coming up everywhere. It was remarkable. There was a caddis hatch, there was a pale evening dun hatch, there were little stoneflies, and I was just astonished. So that was the beginning of my love affair with Hat Creek, and it has been that. I thought I knew how to fly fish because I'd been fishing for 20 years when I got to Hat Creek, but I didn't know anything in relative terms. Hat Creek really taught me how to be a fly fisherman.
It was about 50 years ago when some of what would be the founding members of California Trout, Richard May, Joe Paul in particular, others, Jim Adams was involved with that from PG&E early on, all the way from the Bay Area, recognizing what a unique resource this was, and they really had this vision of a project to restore this area, which involved, at the time, quite a radical notion. And the concept was to strip the creek clean and build a barrier at the bottom, and that's what they did. And that happened in the early 70s, and the results of that were quite remarkable. Hat Creek really blossomed into one of the best and most highly renowned fisheries really in the western United States. It was a destination to come, and a lot of people here flocked for the abundance of large fish, the challenge of catching all these fish on a dry fly, to be a part of the history of the first wild trout area and the concept of it. It really had this mystique that led a lot of people down the Hat Creek trail.
When I came here in '75, that was sort of the glory period of Hat Creek. It had been restored. The fish barrier had been put in and special regulations had been put in at the end of the 60s. So by the beginning of the 70s, the reputation of Hat as a those little fish are very distracting. The reputation of Hat as a wild trout fishery was just in full swing. And so from 75 until the early 80s, it was the most remarkable fishing anywhere. It took me 3 years to figure out how to fish Hat Creek. And then in the early 80s, I started Clearwater House, an inn for fly fishermen upstream from here. And just was here on Hat in its glories days when there were 5,000 fish per mile and there was always something hatching. In the early 80s, we began to see this sediment down below the powerhouse riffle, these little fingers of this gray sand began to appear down there. And as the 80s progressed, the sediment moved down around the corner, around those bends below the powerhouse run and into the head of carbon. So by the middle of the 80s, there was a sediment slug in carbon that had begun to bury the weed beds and thus compromise the habitat for the bugs. And this cut down on the fish populations. There were fewer fish. What wasn't clear was where the sediment was coming from. But it was very clear that Hat was in decline. And it was pretty clear that it was the sediment that was doing it. And so we basically didn't do anything on Hat Creek. It kind of sat here suffering and in real decline. The businesses in the Bernie area suffered, the fly shops closed, tourism fell off. It really made people around here aware of the draw of Hat Creek, of what a profound effect the Wild Trout project had on this part of the world and on the economy here.
The Hat Creek Restoration Project was designed to address some of the key issues that have been affecting this stream for the last 30 years. There's a large amount of sediment that's been flushed into the system. The banks have been destabilized by invasive species, and there's a bunch of noxious weeds all throughout this entire area. So this restoration project is going to put some large woody debris back in the river to provide habitat and structure for fish. We're going to remove a bunch of invasive species, and we're going to plant over 5,000 native riparian plants. This is a three-part project, and restoration is the most important part of that for California trout. But this is also about recreation in this incredible wild trout area of California. And then it's also about protecting cultural resources. This is the ancestral lands of the Ilmaui band of the Pit River tribe. And so putting all three of those things together, the recreation and the restoration and the cultural resource protection is why this project has been so successful. And we couldn't do it without the Lomocatsi Restoration Project, an Oregon-based organization that trains tribal workforces to restore native lands.
Through Lomocatsi's Tribal Ecosystem Partnership Program, we were able to bring our program to the community, but that program is replicable, but it's the community that makes that program, gives it the vitality. So working under the tribal leadership of the band leaders of the Ilmaui, we were able to get folks on the ground, glean from their expertise of the place, and develop a riparian planting strategy that not only incorporated riparian restoration for the benefit of red band trout, but also incorporated traditional ecological knowledge for cultural plants. 35 tribal members have been employed on the project, both adult and youth. We began with an adult workforce training program and have managed 2 seasons of the Isiwa Tribal Youth Workforce Training and Employment Program, where 10 tribal youth implemented restoration work and maintenance activities along the Hat Creek Reach throughout the summer.
We've learned as an organization that it's all about bringing people together, the people that are affected by water and fish issues in the regions where we work. We live in these communities, and bringing people together is the most important thing that we can possibly do. This is a project that began around the legacy of our organization and around fly fishing, but it's turned into something entirely different. It's turned into reconnecting the Pitt River tribe with their ancestral lands. It's turned into a major socioeconomic project in the Bernie area. And it's more than just fly fishing now. It's really about all these people coming together to accomplish something that is valuable for them.
This is really the birthplace of California trout. And I think it's fitting that as we approach our 50th anniversary, that CalTrout is responsible for bringing Hat Creek back to its former glory.
Hat Creek for us really speaks to the heritage of California trout. We're coming on 50 years of involvement here. It speaks to the staying power that's needed to protect these places, restore these places. We started here on Hat Creek with a restoration project. We've had many in between, and we're celebrating today another large-scale restoration project. It's ongoing. It's an ongoing sense of stewardship and involvement that CalTrout has. And coming on 50 years, we think that's pretty special.